Nothing said on the Touchgrass podcast is a recommendation to buy or sell any investments or products. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and the views expressed by anyone on the show are solely their opinions only, not financial advice or necessarily the views of the Touchgrass podcast. Our hosts, guests, and the Touchgrass podcast team may hold positions in the companies, funds, or projects discussed. Enjoy the show.
GM everyone, welcome back to another episode of Touch Grass Podcast. We're back with Austin from DoubleZero. I guess you all saw the big announcement they made recently with Kalshi, bringing institutional data with their uh, kind of novel technology. We talked about fiber optics in the first episode. Today we want to dive deeper into what the Kalshi integration means, and also what new finance is compared to internet capital markets that are kind of original Solana, and also how something like DoubleZero plays a part in the AI build out as well. But yeah, also welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Doing well, doing well. Good to be back.
Awesome. Awesome. Before we talk about everything else, obviously you do a lot of banger episodes on the validated pod. Have you noticed a difference between hosting a pod and like doing these pods with us, for
Yeah,
example?
yeah. It's funny. I think I started being a guest on podcasts a little bit before I started actually like hosting one, and this was largely a takeover of the original Solana podcast, which was totally started this back in, I want to say it was like 2019. It was quite early. It was the No Sharding podcast, and he had this like great idea of just get a bunch of people from more successful blockchains on the pod and argue with them about their technology as a way of like promoting Solana. And it doesn't work nowadays, right? The media landscape's far too fractured. There's too many podcasts. There's too much stuff. But like at that moment in time, it was actually a pretty brilliant strategy because it meant everyone saying like, "Oh, I'm curious what Emin thinks about Avalanche. Oh, what's the Solana thing?" You sort of get people learning about it indirectly. But he got busy and decided to want to do other stuff, and so I started the show originally just as we called it the Solana podcast. And then when I left the foundation to do DoubleZero, I asked if they'd mind if I took the show with me, and they said sure. And there's a few new podcasts now that have come out of the Solana Foundation, but it's gone from being sort of a show. It was never meant to be sort of just about Solana. It was around sort of crypto in general, sort of demystifying it with a bit of a Solana focus, and now it's a broader audience.
Do you still follow the Solana trenches, by the way? Like, I'm very curious to get your opinions on, what you think of the new direction within the
Oh
Solana
yeah.
Foundation or, Solana in general.
Yeah, I mean the thing about Solana is like you can't help but follow the trenches. I mean, it is the place where things are happening. We're starting to see a little bit more activity on the Robinhood chain, which is really interesting as well to see. But for the most part, like if you look at where consumers are doing things, there's Hyperliquid, there's Solana, there's maybe the Robinhood chain a bit, but the thing about Robinhood and especially Hyperliquid is they don't really have much of a builder ecosystem. And that's just because it's designed in a very different way. Hyperliquid has super strong first party products. Solana has no first party products besides like the token program or things like that. And so there's a lot more room for development and innovation and the good and the bad and all the weird stuff you see as well. So if you're interested in like what's happening in crypto in terms of product development and new experimentation, a lot of that's still happening on Solana, and so you can't help but notice.
That makes sense. Austin, start us off. Start us off with what we wanted to talk about in terms of new finance. Maybe let's start off with what the Koshi announcement actually was, and we can
Yeah,
build it up
so
from there.
this is a pretty cool thing we announced last week, which is a integration and sort of partnership with Kalshi and Kalshi Research, which pretty much allows you can think about it as like fast data feeds from the Kalshi matching engine. And so there's a lot of words there, but to basically break these down, Kalshi has a centralized matching engine because it is obviously not a crypto platform. It's a totally different type of thing. Even though you can tokenize some of the event contracts, at its core, it is done through a central matching engine. And the central matching engine is the same way that NYSE, NASDAQ, Coinbase, Binance, any type of centralized financial entity works through sort of one cohesive matching engine. What that means is the faster you can read data from that matching engine on what's changed, right? There's not exactly blocks on Kalshi, but you can think about it very similar to Solana or Ethereum, where when a new block is created, there's a whole new series of updates that have happened. Maybe the price of Ansem has moved. Maybe, an NFT you were trying to buy has been bought already, any of these types of things. And so if you are trying to take trading actions based on new information, getting that new information fast is really, really important. And so what we have with Kalshi now is this integration where people can subscribe to basically data feeds coming out of the Kalshi matching engine. The cool part about this, though, is if you've done any sort of trading on your own, either through like Nautilus and a terminal, or just through an AI agent or something like that, what you're generally doing is subscribing to something called a webhook. And a webhook is basically like an event server where if something changes that you're subscribed to, you'll be given information about it. This is like a technology that was originally developed largely for like push notifications and data updates on like Facebook and these sorts of things. Um, it's not how traditional finance works. So if you're a trader on traditional finance, what you're getting is every single state change streamed to you as fast as possible from the matching engine. If you have a trading server located in the New York Stock Exchange server room or the Nasdaq server room, what you're getting is what's called a multicast feed of everything. And so you have on your server basically a copy of exactly what the same trade book is that's located in that matching engine. Today in new finance, and especially in prediction markets, there's actually not a way outside of DoubleZero to watch everything that's going on in the prediction market. And if you're trading on Binance or Coinbase or something like that, like you can do it just fine on WebSockets. I mean, there's a lot of advantages if you can use multicast, but there's not really that many instruments people might want to trade. We all know what sort of the major assets are, and then there's long tail assets that traded beta to them and those sorts of things. But for the most part, you don't see a ton of sort of new assets popping up overnight, or if you do, they're not usually coming through centralized exchanges. They're coming through token launch platforms. Prediction markets are totally different. There can be thousands and thousands of instruments, event contracts, each minute, each hour, each day that are getting volume through them. And because real world events, which are not predictable, have direct impact on these event contracts, you may say, wow, this thing was really far out of the money and I was very uninterested in it. But, a 2 Sigma event happened and suddenly like I need to pay attention to this market. And so having to say, okay, let me go subscribe to this market, let me catch up with where the market is, you're at a systemic disadvantage as opposed to just having all that data around the market. And maybe it was not interesting to you until 50 milliseconds ago. And now you look at it and say, oh, like I actually do want to trade on this thing.
Yeah, I think your point regarding people using terminals rather than directly using an exchange, like I've seen this a lot among like traders on even crypto Twitter, where they use something like Insilico or something, which is crypto terminal, rather than just directly using the exchange itself, because the execution is better. The way they execute different using different orders matters a lot for them. So you mentioned like what changes, what new people can be, how it can impact them in terms of infrastructure level. Let's say I'm a user, I'm on Kalshi, I'm trading some of these markets. What does this do for me? Is it more liquidity? Is it more speed? What kind of user experience that this will change for me? Is it just faster fees? Because if that allows more market makers, more institutional players, I'm assuming it helps with liquidity as well. If you can you talk about like on the user side, what kind
Yeah.
of impact it may have?
Yeah. So if you are the type of person who's sitting in front of a graphic user interface and clicking a button for each of your trades, this is not going to give you too much of an advantage over what you would just get going through the Kalshi website or front end, because the human reaction time is actually quite slow relative to what people are looking at here. But if you're the type of person who has deep theses about a market that says, hey, if something moves in this range, I'm now interested in it, or if this new piece of information that I've been waiting for, let's say there's a rumor that you think something is going to happen in politics or sports, and it does happen, and if that thing happens, you want to make sure you're taking action on it. Those type of things where you have feedback loops and information loops, that's where DoubleZero Edge for Kalshi is really, really important. So whether that is trading with an AI agent where you have given it a whole series of things that you would like it to do, this is, hey, if the percent chance of this falls above or below this certain amount, do this type of action. Anything that falls into that sort of programmatic or algorithmic style of prediction, that's where getting faster access to data is really important. The second one is if you are someone who would be considered sort of a market maker or a volume trader. And what you sort of see is like, hey, I want to know about like the small markets that start popping off. Maybe I don't want to care about the 20 largest markets because those are already very well tracked by, other people, but I'm really interested in something that comes out of nowhere and gets a lot of velocity. You'll find people who on Kalshi who are like extremely passionate about the Romanian election results and trading that sort of thing. And that's not a market that you're going to find probably like Jane Street or Citadel playing in, but it is still an opportunity there where you can generate a lot of value if you are better at predicting outcomes than the rest of the crowd.
So, Austin, is this sort of data feed available to everyone who wants to do this on Kalshi, or is this more of like a gate kept access where you need access from the Kalshi team? Like, how does that work in
Yeah,
particular?
so you do need a few access provisions. Mostly, we have some restrictions around geofencing, to comply with Kalshi's terms of service about where you are allowed to use that. But past that, no, any trader can sign up for this service. They can start consuming the data. You can go to doublezero.xyz and get started on that process. So it is not sort of a permissionless feed in the way that like anyone anywhere in the world can just go to Jupiter and start trading on it. It's a little bit more along the lines of like signing up for Kalshi. You need to sign up with an account and some other things like that, but it's extremely open access. And so yeah, if you're trading from like Iran, it's going to be hard. But other than that, it's we're pretty open for everyone to use it. And then, of course, you do have to abide by the terms of service of Kalshi. So if you do something in violation of Kalshi's terms of service, they can basically request that we remove a specific consumer of data. But, that's true in any of these markets that you'll be kicked off for violating the terms of service.
That makes sense. And then, Austin, is like the broader thesis, like you have this integration with Kalshi. I would say it's sort of first of its kind in terms of DoubleZero and the new finance stuff that we've been talking about. I think the first question there is more, as you progress and you look at other players, I would assume using DoubleZero tech to make trading more efficient. Like market makers want to do this on a lot of different platforms. Maybe they want to do it on a Hyperliquid, for example. And my assumption would be like if they wanted to do something like this there and the DoubleZero build out isn't already made, like they'd have to put in a lot of effort to build that out maybe on their end. How are you thinking about new finance and the way that your team prioritizes this sort of tech for other platforms?
Yeah,
Also,
so
like a good
Kalshi,
example, probably a good example to set context for people is, let's say compute markets are going to be a big thing, right? Like people trading price of compute and stuff like that. But the way they get that data, I don't know, it just feels like gray area kind of right now. So is that where DoubleZero kind of fits in and enables these markets in a better way? Probably like an example to kind of build off of.
yeah, definitely. So, there's a lot of ways to sort of look at this and think about this. So, one of the important things with Kalshi is it's the first non-crypto market DoubleZero supports. So, previously there was a huge focus on Solana shreds, and that still continues to be a strong business for the protocol, where we have the fastest shred distribution system on Solana, so we have plenty of traders subscribing to that. About 60% of Solana is actually contributing shreds through that at the moment. But branching out just from crypto is really important because we're seeing so much more attention in new finance here, whether it's prediction markets or centralized exchanges, which again, centralized exchanges aren't really crypto. Like, yes, Binance trades crypto assets, but under the hood, it is a totally centralized exchange. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is just a different type of service. Hyperliquid as well, is a great example of something that falls a little bit in between. Is it a centralized exchange? Is it a decentralized exchange? It's somewhere in between. Hyperliquid's definitely something we're looking at developing products for because we get a lot of interest from traders as well. When you look at something like compute markets, they remind me a lot of like carbon credit markets back in the day, where they're just very poorly priced right now. The data is fairly obscure, it's fairly locked up. Brett Harrison has a new company that's working on compute markets as well. I've been really excited to watch what he's been working on. But all of these things, the commonality between them is low quality market data, right? Why are carbon credits such a hard market to price? because there's not much transparency around the data coming from them. Same with compute markets. Usually what you're seeing in compute markets is there's some, 4-year billion-dollar deal coming out of a frontier lab, and then there's this spot market for compute that's like a little messy, in part because compute is not actually fungible today. And so, stuff looks a little bit more like a commodities market, but like a commodities market with a lot of variation. Like oil markets are a great example of this, where like not all crude is created equal, and certain crude is worth more than less. Not all compute is created equal, right? The physical location of the compute matters too. And so I think what we see across the space is there's a dearth of high quality data about what's actually going on markets. And information and access to information is the only way that markets efficiently price. Right? This is capitalism and markets 101, is the efficient market hypothesis, is that when everyone has the perfect information about a market, the net profit on a market should be zero because everything trades at exactly marginal utility. Um, we are very far away from that in compute markets and in most new finance markets today, because everybody, I think rightfully, is very excited about the application layer. And they should be. There's incredible things happening on the application layer. But without the underlying infrastructure layer, these markets are not as successful as they could be. And I think the biggest example of this is probably the flash crash on 1010, which basically froze the crypto market. Like, I think people in retail don't really understand quite how frozen the capital markets were for crypto during 1010. We saw like multiple percentage point deviations between centralized exchanges because market makers and traders just didn't have confidence in those markets to actually be willing to make those markets, and they couldn't get sufficient data out of centralized exchanges either. So there's a long way to go here in this industry.
Yeah, and kind of following up on that, you said the infrastructure is, even though the value and the creation of where we are headed is the application layer, but we're still kind of building out the infrastructure. And the infrastructure right now that's being spent trillions of dollars is like this AI build out and data centers. Where does like DoubleZero fit into that stack of build out? We see GPUs, we see all of these things. Is there like what's the place for DoubleZero in that stack? And are you kind of looking into that kind of in AI build out as well?
Yeah, so there's a ton of companies doing really great stuff in terms of like AI infrastructure on the GPU side and on sort of the orchestration side. A lot of the place that we are thinking DoubleZero plugs in is on network connectivity. And Elon Musk had a tweet about this a little while ago that was basically saying like we need, I think, something like a 10 to 100x more fiber and connectivity than we actually have today to meet the needs of AI into the future. We very much agree with that thesis. There are very smart people out there working on like very interesting things for decentralized AI training and decentralized AI inference. Our engineers are some of the best network engineers in the world, but they're not AI experts from that perspective. So you're not going to see DoubleZero trying to train a frontier model or something like that. But the place that we fit in is, if you are a compute provider and you have a compute market you would like to access, you have GPUs you would like to be able to rent out. Well, the public internet doesn't really offer you enough bandwidth to efficiently load those GPUs. And so there's a whole bunch of work we've been doing with multicast and a few other technologies that you'll be hearing more about in the future here to make this stuff suitable for running distributed training on the DoubleZero network. Now, we're not providing the GPUs, we're not providing the hosting environments. The beauty of this, though, is that anyone who has one of these data centers and they're looking to attract more customers to it, they can bring the DoubleZero network into their data center themselves. Again, this is a permissionless network to extend. So it's not like you have to wait for us to do a build out to where you are. You can bring the DoubleZero network to wherever you would like it to be.
Yeah, I think Elon also mentioned that compute is not like the, obviously it's going to keep growing and the demand is going to be infinite. He also mentioned that memory, people are underestimating how important it's going to be. It's probably going to be more needed than compute in some ways. And as you're like, that connector of data from one place to another and transporting it in an efficient way over the internet and a better way or a new normal way. Like how are you thinking about memory right now? Because it's being
Yeah.
used in different ways and in ways we haven't seen before. How does memory fit in? You talked about compute, but memory is also a bigger thing, and I'm assuming that DoubleZero is more adjacent to that rather than GPUs.
Yeah, this goes back. Like if you talk to someone like Kevin Bowers, who's like the lead researcher and scientist on the Fire Dancer team at Jump, he'll talk about this even like early in his career when he was building supercomputers for like government agencies and that sort of thing and research institutions. The limiting factor wasn't actually the compute. Like everybody thinks the compute is the limiting factor. What's actually usually the limiting factor is how quickly you can get information to the CPU cores or the GPU cores for processing. This is something that a number of folks in the AI space have talked about as well, is basically the core utilization rate. So you look at one of these like modern GPUs, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of actual GPU cores within what we call like a NVIDIA GPU, right? It's actually like a cluster of hundreds to thousands of different cores. And each of those cores needs to be tasked with work to do. Otherwise, you are just burning electricity and burning time. And in a world where all these things are financed, time literally is money for here. So if your utilization of your GPU is, let's say, 90%, well, you're losing 10% of your profit. You're just leaving 10% of your margin on the table there. And
Yeah,
so a lot of the work in software that's been done is how do you actually break up incoming jobs and load them appropriately onto different GPU clusters. And so part of the reason that Colossus has offloaded a lot of its work to Anthropic is because they didn't have very good GPU utilization rate. That apparently a lot of the way XAI has been trained is for very big problems, like your SpaceX type of problems. It hasn't actually been trained for a bunch of like fairly simple questions or write this tweet for me or those sorts of things. And so the utilization rate was far below the industry average
yeah,
here. Memory sort of falls in the same category where if you think about like the speed of a system, right? The fastest thing are electrons moving on a chip itself. And then you go out onto like in the CPU world, the L1 cache, which is orders of magnitude slower. The L2 cache is orders of magnitude slower. By the time you're going out to RAM, you're talking about like many orders of magnitude slower, let alone NVMe or any other type of storage medium. And so part of the reason that memory has become such a big focus here is because the faster you can get the memory and the more stuff you can hold in memory, the less stuff you have to hold in less efficient storages as well. I mean, Cerberus is a lot of their focus on large chips is to be able to have better memory architecture integrated into these things as well. Apple was very much ahead of the curve with unified memory, and so you can do a hell of a lot more in a Mac Studio than you really should be able to do because of their unified memory architecture. It really helped here a bunch. So what we do on the connectivity side is again like a billion times slower than what's happening on the L1 cache in terms of bandwidth, but it is still like all of these things have to work the entire pipeline from your storage array with petabytes of training data on it down to how you pipe data into that actually like one CUDA core sitting on a GPU. That entire pipeline has to work. It has to work as efficiently as possible, or the end result is a bunch of wasted compute time. That's a very long answer to your simple question around memory. But it's like this is Amdahl's law. Every time you solve one problem, there's another bottleneck in the system, and the most
yeah.
under addressed bottleneck today is the connectivity bottleneck, not within a data center, but between data centers. And the beauty of that is like there's literally billions of dollars a year going to solve all the other problems. There's very little focus today on the connectivity side. And that's starting to get more attention, and that's part of why we're looking at building out a bunch of work to make AI connectivity stronger.
So you mentioned utilization ratio, like how like I saw a number somewhere that these GPUs and the whole build out, it's only being used like 50 to 60% of their capacity or their potential, like how much they can be squeezed and how much they can be kind of maximized. So what do you think that improvement can be when someone like shifts over to something like DoubleZero and that connectivity problem is solved? What kind of difference in terms of, let's say, efficiency it makes? Because even if it's a small number, that could
Yeah.
be tens of billions, hundreds of billions in difference.
Yeah, so a lot of across the board in a lot of different areas, a lot of the improvements that we've made in AI over the last few years are just software. Like the industry standard now is about 97% utilization rate. It's actually extremely high, which is great. It means, and some of the most valuable AI infrastructure companies, they're not infrastructure companies at all. They're software companies that have done really cool, smart work on how do you break up a complex inference task into multiple, like smaller parts so you can more efficiently distribute it throughout a GPU cluster. That type of stuff is really, really important. But we're starting to get to a place where that utilization rate, 93 versus 100% utilization, yeah, you've got a 3% gain you can get there, but 3% gain is nowhere near what it was a few years ago when, we were talking about much lower utilization rates. And so this is kind of one of the areas where, you look at like when OpenAI is putting in a new data center with Microsoft, what are they doing? Well, they're picking locations based on where they can get electricity. Then they're running a ton of fiber between these data centers as well because they need that massive connectivity side of things. The frontier labs will always be doing their own frontier things, right? They've got more money than God, and so they can just go ahead and build everything themselves. But when you get down to the level of like a Noose Research or any of these folks who are doing distributed training or distributed inference, whether that's sort of a Venice or someone like that, all of those types of systems are really starting to get bottlenecked by the connectivity layer, both between their training clusters and between their inference clusters, because they're not in usually their own custom built data centers the way that OpenAI or Anthropic would be. They're operating in a system that is they don't have the resources to customize it in quite the same way, and so that's kind of where something like a DoubleZero really fits in.
Yeah, this probably is a little tangent, but it's still related to an AI question. But what are your current thoughts on the frontier labs in general? Like how they've been. Obviously, I've heard that Anthropic has 10x, and they'll probably 10x again, and next year they'll have $1 trillion in revenue. Just thinking in terms of that kind of scale is just
Yeah.
mind-boggling. But wanted to get your thoughts on like not like comparing one to other, but how do you see the current growth of AI, and do you like the strategy of how these companies are going about it? Because they're like pretty much kind of creating gods in some sense, or at least that's how they feel. And
Yeah.
recently I saw some tweets saying it's from David Sachs or someone saying Anthropic could be the only private company, and governments like putting those in the same sentence just feels weird. But just want to get your thoughts on where we are with AI, and anything that's non-consensus that you feel more people should pay attention to.
Yeah, maybe let me start out by saying like I am quite bullish on AI. I think all these companies are building like truly transformative technology that will change the fundamental fabric of how humans interface with each other, let alone the world around them. That being said, I am skeptical of the idea that there will be one or two private companies at the natural end of this, in part because if you actually look at the AI companies, they're quite bad at revenue capture at the moment. The majority of them, at least recently, they're not exactly making money on the models. They have revenue, but they don't have profits, and the gap between that revenue and profit is actually quite large, even when you take out like the capex exposure. Just the on the opex metrics, they're not exactly profitable at the moment. And so what that sort of like reminds me of is a little bit of like the Uber and Lyft wars of sort of like the 2014 to 2017, where it was a little bit of a race to the bottom, and Uber won that, but it won it at quite a cost, right? The Uber stock has like barely recovered from that war they had to fight. And so I
It
do
also took
think
like
that
20 years. It also took like 20 years or something.
yeah, and like I think the acceleration will be much. The trouble with Uber is like it's physical infrastructure at the end of the day, right? Like you have cars, you have weirdos driving them. It's a whole mess, right? It's a terrible business to be in until we have self driving cars. Um, but and part of this was like Travis was just wrong about the trajectory of self driving cars. If we had self driving cars 10 years earlier, Uber's business model would have looked quite different. It was just that the curves on the graph lined up in a place that was much further out than I think everyone thought they were going to. I think AI is in a very different place. But what we see is as the frontier models get better, the secondary and tertiary models also get better, and they get exponentially cheaper to run. And so if you sort of think about it from the perspective of like, is OpenAI really, or is Anthropic really going to like deploy their own version of Robinhood that's fully built by an AI? Probably not. Right? There's a whole bunch of reasons, and a lot of them are like boring regulatory, but like I can't imagine like OpenAI or Anthropic going out there and getting MTL licenses and all of the securities brokerage accounts and everything that they need in order to be able to run like a business like Robinhood. And so you get to a point where you're saying, well, what does Robinhood actually need? What level of performance from an AI agent do they really need? And so you may run into a situation where we've built like very similar to like what the US military did in the Cold War of like, wow, we've built like the world's most impressive military technology, and there's kind of no civilian commercialization of it. And so the minute that the Cold War ended, like a bunch of these like big defense contractors kind of went out of business because while they had the world's most advanced phase array radars, there wasn't really an application for that in civilian life. And so you end up with a monopsony, which is basically the opposite of a monopoly where you only have one purchaser for a thing. And so there is a future where we get to a place where folks are looking around, they say, wow, these frontier models are incredible. I don't really need them. And so my willingness to pay for them is quite limited. And at the same time, it gets easier and easier to internalize that into your own operations. And so what today is a data moat in the AI companies, right? They have this huge advantage on data, this huge advantage on capital expenditure. They have no advantage on the regulatory front. And like,
Yeah.
Eli Lilly or Caterpillar or, just these like Bank of America, these boring companies for the most part, like they have a regulatory advantage in that they have licenses, they know how these markets work. And I think we are being a little bit, we are underestimating what AI can accomplish from a technical standpoint, and we are overestimating what it can accomplish from an ability to navigate government and politics.
Yeah, I've seen your episode, I think, on health, on validated. That was great, and I agree as well. But one other question before I give it to Rachit. What do you think about XAI? Like, I've been using Grok recently, like for the past couple of weeks, and it's been awesome, and it kind of feels underrated. And if you think about it, like Elon has probably the best data set of social networks in general, with Twitter and whatnot, and you just said that it's like the most important kind of resource a lab can have. Is it are people underlooking XAI, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, like XAI is like exactly the thesis that I'm talking about here, which is like they have spent so much less money than OpenAI or Anthropic, and they don't. I mean, depending on which benchmark you look at, like they're better in some areas, they're not quite as good in others. They're within 15% of where the frontier models are, right? I think we can. That's probably a conservative estimate. They might be even closer, but they're at least in spitting distance of the frontier models, having spent significantly less money on that infrastructure and training. I think also like, I mean, this is like this is the secret of SpaceX is it's like quickly becoming the everything company. And so if you think about it, like when you have large scale industrial manufacturing capacity through SpaceX, you have Terafab, you have XAI, they're all in the same company structure effectively. Your ability to create feedback loops that produce exponential results is so much higher. So, like Anthropic, OpenAI, any of these frontier labs, they can go to General Motors and say, hey, look at all this amazing engineering you can do on your cars with like our technology. But it's a sales process. You have to convince them that it's worth spending, $15 million a year on AI work to optimize your manufacturing lines. That's not the case at SpaceX. They just say, great, like there's this resource of a sister company, like let's use it, let's go all in on this. If the rumors of Tesla being bought by SpaceX end up being true as well, like suddenly you've got an even tighter feedback loop here. And so like you kind of look at it as like the juggernaut of SpaceX and XAI and Terafab and all of this is vertical integration. And there's currently the only vertical integration that exists in AI at the moment is on the supply side. It is like, and it's like tepid vertical integration too. It's not even full vertical integration. It's like, hey, we've leased out this data center for 6 years and bought all the forward compute in it, that's not the same thing as owning it directly. And so at some point, you get to a place where the spoils of victory go to the people who are willing to get their hands dirty at the lowest level of optimization. We're not there yet. We're still in very much a land grab, arms race, like throw the money at it, grow. I think there's a very bright future for Anthropic and OpenAI, and I'm looking forward to the Anthropic IPO coming up later this year. Like it's gonna be a wild, crazy moment. And I think it's an incredibly valuable company. I think the long term of all of this stuff is, and I'm not saying like these guys will fail and SpaceX will win out, but I'm saying there is a credible theory for how that could play out. And I think we have probably never seen less certainty in the specific AI company's future than we do now, even though as a broad-based category, like this is where your investment thesis is just like buy the AI things, right? I don't know which one is going to win out, but I know as a concept, this is not going away.
It's like 2021 DeFi summer, essentially.
Sure, right?
Um,
I mean, buy all the tokens.
But Austin, like on the topic of SpaceX, I'm very glad KG segued into this so that I can ask my question. But Elon's been talking about data centers in space, like all of that stuff. I'm pretty sure you guys look at that and be like, hey, like is DoubleZero going to become a space company like the next 3 to 4 years once this happens? Like what happens then?
Yeah, the cost of a satellite cluster is going down dramatically, right? Like the same thing, like economies of scale. You can launch a high-speed internet cluster now for like low hundreds of millions of dollars. You can imagine that cost will go down more over time. If DoubleZero, the protocol is in a capitalized enough place and valuable enough that can become a thing, absolutely. And the beauty of it is we don't need to do what like Starlink is trying to do, where they're servicing like internet to hundreds of thousands and millions of people around the world. We only kind of need point to point to specific downlink stations, right? Like all you need is like a receiver on the top of a data center. And so you can actually do much higher bandwidth and much lower latency because you don't need to service like, people like my mom who was out in Montana and had a Starlink dish and was like very happy with 100 megs of internet service. You don't like those people actually take up a lot of spectrum. And so because, something like DoubleZero in space would be doing something very different, there's definitely possibilities there. I think the thing when you talk about space data centers is it is the right long-term goal. I think to get there, first we need data center automation on the ground, and then we can worry about data center automation in the sky. But there's a bunch of cool companies now that are actually doing like automation of data centers where, it's little things right now that like, if you go visit a data center, what is the most ubiquitous thing you see in any data center today? A dude pushing a cart with a bunch of hard drives on it. And all he's doing is he's looking for red lights. And he goes, oh, that hard drive failed. Let me pull that one out and put a new one in and, drop it in the shredder and move on. And like, that's his job all day is an 8-hour shift of just swapping out hard drives. Because, when you have a billion hard drives in a data center, a certain number just fail each day. And so that is the type of like automation that we have not, like, you're not going to send an astronaut up to space to swap hard drives, right? Or upgrade GPUs or something like that. And so we need to perfect data center automation. But then I think after you get to that point, it makes a lot of sense conceptually to try and offload compute to environments where you have more readily available electricity. And solar panels in space are significantly more efficient than solar panels on Earth because they don't need to worry about the oxygen in the atmosphere.
Would you say the AI data centers in space is further out than we're expecting, similar to the self-driving car analogy that we talked about
I
a
don't
few
know.
minutes
How
ago?
far out do you think they are?
Well, Elon's been saying 2028, the first one. Do you think that's
I have
realistic?
no doubt that we'll have. I mean, we basically already have data centers in space, right? Like a modern NSA satellite has a ton of compute on it. The idea of edge AI computing, like you better believe they're processing a lot of that reconnaissance imagery locally and not sending it all back down to the ground stations for processing. There's probably both things happening in parallel, but like for generations, we've been putting a lot of compute in space. It's just only been for military applications. 2028 seems like a completely reasonable timeline for them to have at least a proof of concept in a space data center.
Is that something that have you had an active conversation with a space company about this? Like the way that me and KG have been looking at it, like obviously there was the crypto stuff, then there was the AI stuff, there's more recently the robotic stuff, and then in the early stage venture space, you just see a bunch of space companies trying to do different things. Have you actively had any conversations with them?
I personally have been investing in early stage space tech since 2020. So mostly in private markets. So for me, this is an area I've been tracking for a very long time. For DoubleZero, it's a little bit too far outside of our core at the moment. It's an area we aspire to grow into, but for us, there's still a lot of work to be done on planet Earth before we be looking at doing satellite constellations or something like that.
Is that something you'd want to talk about? Your angel investments into the space industry? Like what sort of your thesis there? What are the companies that you've been looking at?
Yeah, I mean, so back in 2020, I met a guy through. Do you know the podcast Acquired?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've known Ben and David since like 2016 when they first started the show. Back when like no one listened to it, but it's still one of my favorite podcasts out there. They have a really great Slack group too. It's one of the only like podcast Slack groups I've come across. And I met a guy there, Jonathan Lacoste, who was starting a VC fund, which is called Ambition VC. They used to be called Space VC. And so, just sort of got connected with him initially through there. Did a SpaceX SPV with him, which has turned out quite nicely. And then since then, his fund has been doing a ton of very early stage space and defense tech investing, done a lot of follow-ons with those, as well as like an LP in that. That's everything from sort of True Anomaly and those types of like more sort of defense oriented companies to things like Hubble, which is doing like data communication to like legitimately Bluetooth devices from orbit. It's very interesting stuff in terms of how that's getting built out, as well as some of the companies like Space Forge, which have actually been trying to do manufacturing in space. Manufacturing in space is very interesting. I think when you're looking at the future of silicon wafer manufacturing, uh, orbital manufacturing actually becomes quite interesting there, not because we don't have enough land for factories, but because gravity actually becomes a meaningful problem in wafer manufacturing, which is very interesting. Basically, the
Yeah.
layers of silicon that they're putting down are getting so thin that one of the limiting factors is how do we move these things? Because you have to move them around a factory. And in microgravity, you can have significantly less support structure necessary. The final chip is obviously like solid either way, but in that manufacturing process, gravity and the deflection due to gravity is actually like a problem in manufacturing today.
It's actually so crazy how, even though I felt like crypto used to give me these kind of goosebumps where like it's learning about the tech and all this, and right now crypto is so boring and everything else is so exciting. And in general, like hardware, I feel I'm so happy that hardware is cool again, in a sense. And but yeah, but we have to come back to crypto, Austin. One question
Yeah.
for our community. You talked about your non-consensus areas and in other areas, but what is in crypto right now that people should pay attention to? Everyone knows, obviously, prediction markets, perp taxes, RW equities, a lot of the stuff is exciting. But every cycle, every time there's something new that kind of catches people's attention. What is, in your opinion, that could be in the next coming bull market or next cycle that you're paying attention to, you're investing, you're looking to partner, that people should know about?
Yeah, I think in some ways, like one of the tragedies of the last few years of crypto is it seems like everything is finance now. And crypto is an incredible place for finance. That should be a major pillar of what's interesting and what's happening in crypto. At the same time, it is sad to me that we don't see as much experimentation with non-financial things. Like I was never a Farcaster believer, but I liked that it was an experimentation that existed. And so I would love to see sort of more of that getting built. I think the challenge that crypto has never quite managed to crack is how do you build things that have centralized esque experiences but don't necessarily have centralized control. Like the problem with Farcaster was like the interface was always terrible. Like it was just a bad consumer product, even if the back end was good. But we see the same problem with Blue Sky and the Fediverse when that was a thing, and all these sort of attempts is just like people are substituting like a moral framework for a product framework. And we see this like time and time again. And it's like the reason aggregators are a useful concept in DeFi is because they actually improve the underlying product experience for users. You get a better price using an aggregator than you do just going around to a bunch of DeFi apps and checking in on them. And that's awesome. That's super cool.
Yeah.
Most of the sort of stuff in crypto, there hasn't really been an advantage to using it. It's been like, it's like Twitter, but it's decentralized. Okay, cool. But like, who cares? Like tweets are public anyway. Like, am I really worried about being censored on Twitter? It's like, and if I am, like, are there enough people who care about getting an unfiltered Austin to move to a new social platform? No, of course not. Like the president of the United States could barely get anyone to join Truth Social. Like, I don't think like Twitter, but on the blockchain, is going to actually like be a compelling consumer product experience. At least not yet.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, it's something like I also kind of every time I see that we used to like I like the metaverse era even though it was ended badly and stuff, but at least we were like land in metaverse, we were like doing all this cool shit. And everyone, right, even right now, right, people still agree that NFTs were so cool, that era of crypto was so cool in general compared to
Yeah.
what we have now. Definitely, we need more of those moonshot ideas. But yeah, I think also this was
I
great.
think Austin, one last question that I have is,
Sure.
obviously the whole thesis of DoubleZero is to get stuff moving faster, like in terms of data moving faster. We've seen a lot of value in, like Trump with Truth Social and offering price feeds earlier,
Yeah.
right? Have you guys ever thought about curating the price feed yourself? Could that be a next step for DoubleZero? Like Oracle's obviously one of the most profitable businesses in crypto. Have you guys thought about that?
Yeah. So the thing with oracles is, oracles are like, I'm gonna get in trouble for this. Oracles are kind of like a failure of crypto. Like you really shouldn't need an oracle. Like the idea that you need an external reference point aggregated from multiple venues to determine what a good price is, like that is a function of the AMM model, right? Like order books don't really need oracles in the same way. Like Hyperliquid does not use any external oracles really. It's just an internal oracle, which is just a way to say like it's an internal function of price. Um, oracles provide value in terms of a gut check on something. DoubleZero is not going to tell you what a good price for Bitcoin is. It's going to tell you what other people's prices for Bitcoin are. And I think when we move to a world where like you can get fast market data feeds from all of the major exchanges, your AI agent can compute what it thinks a good cost of a good price for Bitcoin is on any trading venue and decide whether it wants to trade or not. I think the idea that like we are still going to need an oracle to tell our AI agents what a good price is like a little bit challenging. The oracles are also risk points too, right? Like oracle manipulation, like the inputs feeding them can be changed, right? There's a whole bunch of those types of problems as well. And so the best source of true price is true price, right? It is simply the price from all the venues, and then you add your own special sauce onto it. And so I don't think we'd get into the business of telling people what a good price is. Instead, we just want you to be able to understand, hey, what does Binance think the price of Bitcoin is at this exact moment? What does Jupiter think it is? What does Coinbase think it is? Right? These are sort of the ways that professional traders do not. There's no NYSE Oracle, right? What they get is they get full L3 book data. They don't get the L1 data. And so like some of the stuff that Pith has done with putting confidence intervals in, that's actually a real like innovation, and that's like quite interesting. And so for a lot of uses, like as a gut check, that's really strong. What professional traders want though is they want the full L3 order book for all the major venues where price discovery occurs, and that's something that DoubleZero is able to provide.
Yeah, I think I agree. But yeah, this is awesome, Austin. I mean, I would love to do the next one on robotics maybe, and when we actually have them mass produced or something. But how
Yeah,
do you guys fit in? Because I think it applies to same way in AI, same way to robotics as well. But yeah, thank you so much for your time.
definitely. Thanks again.